I think we are live. We are transitioning, just making sure that everyone is on board and all systems go. Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Please join us if you are sitting by your computer. We're starting our fourth episode of Media Wars, and we are very excited that we have a remarkable array of guests and speakers and authors and movers and shakers with us. This is Media Wars, which examines the truths and absurdities of our era, centering on the US Israel war on Iran. It's rather fast paced and eclectic and blends media roundups with commentary and analysis to expose the folly and brutality of empire and imperial media. The program moves between granular detail and broad historical and geopolitical context, treating weighty, world altering subjects in often a casual, sometimes irreverent voice. This is not suitable for children, especially the last part, which deals with social media posts. So, welcome everyone, and welcome to my co host, Mouin. How are you?
Hello, Bassam. We have a great lineup again today.
Absolutely. We're going to, let me just say that we have with us Samira Mohyeddin, Adam Johnson, and Nabih Boulos. And I will be introducing, let me just very quickly say a couple words about each. Nabil Boulos is the Middle East bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times, where his work over the last 14 years has focused on wars and their impact on the region and beyond. Adam Johnson is co host of the Citations Needed podcast and author of the book that is coming out now, I understand, of How to Sell a Genocide, the media's complicity in the destruction of Gaza. And last but not least at all, Samira Mohyeddin is a multi award winning journalist and documentary filmmaker. She has a Master of Arts in Modern Middle Eastern History from the University of Toronto and a graduate of Genocide Studies from the Zorian Institute. Welcome, everyone. I am very delighted to have you. We will get right to it, and I will leave the floor for Maureen to get the conversation going.
Thank you, Bassam. And today we will start with Nabih for a very simple reason. Nabih is in Beirut. There have been major developments today in Beirut, another ceasefire punctuated by a bombing of the Lebanese capital, meaning there is no ceasefire. And Nabih, you will need to rush off sooner rather than later to cover these events. So let me start by saying, we open our newspapers every day, or rather, open our laptops or mobile devices every day, and we're told there's a ceasefire in Lebanon. Um, it seems like a bit of cognitive dissonance. First you read about the ceasefire, then you hear about bombings and killings and villages being razed to the ground. How does this work in terms of the coverage of something that clearly isn't?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is not the first ceasefire that is more that, one side ceases and the other one fires, right? And it just so happens that the side that always gets to fire is Israel in this case, whether that's in Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, or elsewhere. Now, the fact of the matter is that the way the way we talk about this in the media, I suppose, is that you say, I mean, you have to state, there is a ceasefire that has been signed. um, I myself have avoided this whole notion of that this strike, um, what's the word for it? Like rattles the fragile ceasefire. Again, my sort of underlying feeling is that of course there is no ceasefire, right? And so in my copy, I have tended to say that yes, the ceasefire was signed such and such a day, but that the ceasefire is more notional for people in Lebanon, in the south of Lebanon. Now, of course, the interesting part here is again that we're seeing this now situation playing out tonight, where there's an attack on Dahia, the southern suburbs of Beirut, and ostensibly Beirut and its southern suburbs were off limits, right, in this new understanding, right, in this new ceasefire. I should add that a previous ceasefire that started in 2024 between Hezbollah and Israel, that was violated roughly 13,000 times by Israel, according to UNIFIL. This is
At
not
all.
like figures from Hezbollah, the government. This is from UNIFIL, right, from the UN. And so we're talking about 13,000 violations between, obviously attacks, like, these drone overflights, etc., etc. And of course, Israel had freedom of action throughout that time, which is, I think, what Israel is trying to get back into now, right? The idea is that this current arrangement of the ceasefire, where certain parts of the country are off limits, and this idea that Hezbollah is still fighting back, these are all problems for Israel right now. They would want to return to the previous form of the ceasefire, and again, I use this intentionally, right? The one that was in 2024. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I tied to this, you're making the point that Israel wants to go back to the previous quote unquote ceasefire. But there's, I think, now an added factor, which is that there is a ceasefire in the Persian Gulf between the United States and Iran. And what struck me in today's attack on Beirut is that the Israelis went out of their way to inform us that this attack was carried out in coordination and with the approval of Washington. And, why would they need to tell us that? Is it perhaps one way of trying to goad the Iranians into demonstrating to them that their ceasefire with the Americans is more symbolic than real?
Well, so I think it's fair to say that Iran has already reacted to this notion of a ceasefire being more symbolic than real. For example, yesterday we saw that this project Freedom that came about yesterday morning, right? That was responded to with a lot of force from the Iranians, in the sense that they refused to let it just be acceptable. This idea of ships kind of like pointing the way in Hormuz for them to go. At the same time, I think it is true, right, that the idea would be to have a breakdown of the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran. It's clear that Israel would prefer war to continue, right, with Iran. Right, that seems clear. I think. I mean, that's not a surprise for Lebanese consumption. This idea now, right, in Beirut and elsewhere. The fact of the matter is that if a high value target comes about, then we have permission to act. Right. Again, this is a doubling down on the notion that Israel has freedom to act, and others, of course, do not. Right. And that's why, actually, by the way, we see this invention of the phrase double-sided ceasefire. Right. Normally, if you say that a ceasefire is one-sided, that's okay, fine, like a unilateral ceasefire, sure, but you don't often use the words double-sided ceasefire when talking about just a plain old ceasefire, right? Like, you don't need to explain things in that way. This has become our way now, where we have to always mention if a ceasefire is unilateral or double-sided. And that's because of the new normal, if you will, when it comes to Israeli actions post any kind of peace deal, or I should say truce deal, more accurately.
And another aspect of this, of course, is that there are now formal meetings, discussions, negotiations, whatever you want to call them, between the Israeli and Lebanese governments, and this is causing a lot of discussion and debate within Lebanon, because it's quite clear that the government doesn't isn't really doesn't enjoy the support of some of Lebanon's most powerful and popular forces for this course of action. How is that being discussed in Lebanon and within the Lebanese media? Are different media lining up very clearly behind one party or the other?
For sure. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you look at, ostensibly, let's say, more right-wing groups like the Quwat, right, Lebanese forces, right, and their related media, they are very much okay with the idea of, yes, let's have peace, yes, let's have normalization. In fact, there is this one outlet called This Is Beirut, right, that is basically openly funded by a Lebanese Zionist, right, Al Sahnawi, and I mean, the other day I saw, a series of interviews that were posted on social media on This Is Beirut, where they asked Lebanese about the prospect of peace, right? And they're like, "Yeah, sure, we'll go to Tel Aviv," and others are saying, "Yeah, we'll be happy to be having them in Beirut." But I should add that this is not the opinion of the vast majority of the country, right? I mean, even beyond the traditional bastions of support for Hezbollah, right? From the Shia or what have you, or some of the leftists, etc. Right? There is, I think, an overall lack of desire to have peace with Israel. Now, there is a desire to have a ceasefire. Let's be clear. People do not want to have war, right? But this notion that they are gung ho about the idea of visiting Tel Aviv, and yes, let's have them all come over. No, that is a fantasy. And I mean, again, some of the discussions also center around the idea of having a peace like with Jordan and Israel, right? Like, I mean, in the way that Jordan and Israel have their peace deal, this sort of cold peace, Egypt as well. These are also ideas that are floated, right? I mean, often the sense is, oh, look at Jordan, it's fine. Oh, look at Egypt, it's fine. Like, why shouldn't we have peace? And of course, the flip side to that is that people tell you, oh, Jordan, it doesn't have a lot of control over its foreign policy and over a lot of other things. Same thing for Egypt, that this normalization leads to oppression in media, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a fairly nuanced discussion going on in the media and in the public about this.
Thanks, Nabih. I understand that you must leave, so I know that you have bigger things to deal with right now. Do you have any
No,
last?
no, it's not about that. It's just that we have, the news has basically come, like I've been overwhelmed by events. Believe me, I would love to stay and talk more because it's an
Yeah, yeah,
important,
no,
essential
absolutely.
topic.
That's
But
what
the
I
fact
mean.
that,
Do you
right.
have any I shouldn't say last words, not when you're in Beirut.
Hmm.
Do you have anything to share before
Yeah.
you attend to these important events?
Yes, I do. I recently was subject to a social media campaign, where I was sort of castigated for a headline that I wrote. And the fact is, I didn't write the headline, right? There's this belief that us journalists are the ones who end up writing the headlines of our stories, and whether that's in print or online. And I'm here to inform everyone that we 99% of the time do not write the headline. With that being said, although I was subject to that castigation, I'm nevertheless uh, pleased to have received it, because it means that people are actually paying attention to headlines and not accepting what is sort of framed in them, right? The headline in question was, and this was for the last horrific attack on Beirut from the Israelis on April 8th, I believe, where it said that Hezbollah, or that Israel had killed 160 of its foes, or it attacked 160 Hezbollah targets, some awful headline of that nature, which basically implies that Israel, was just attacking only Hezbollah, which, you know, was nonsense in that case. So the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, us journalists, we don't write the headlines, um, but nevertheless, that level of scrutiny, I would say, is important, because just as pro-Israeli media or pro-Israeli parties will scrutinize every word and every article and every interview done by everyone, right? And will send calls for corrections to various media. I believe that pro-Palestinian sides should do the same and hold media just as accountable. And on that
And
pontificating note, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
yeah, before you go, Nabi, thanks for raising that point. But if people aren't going to castigate you for a headline you didn't write, who should they direct their complaints to?
Should be to the paper, to be honest with you. I mean, look, let's be clear. I got attacked for it, and I'm fine. But when that happened, I reached out to my editors, and I made sure to inform them of the situation. I would prefer it if I wasn't castigated all the time. Obviously, it would be better if it went to someone else, right? If it was tagged to the paper or the outlet or what have you. But I do think the point is that that level of scrutiny is important, right? And you see someone like Asal Rad, on social media, fighting the good fight over headlines and things of that sort with the framing. I would say that's essential, and it's important to keep note of that stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nabi. We will
Thank
we will
you,
let you
and
do your.
I'm sorry.
No
I
worries.
apologize.
No worries at all. انتبه لحالك حبيبي.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
سلام سلام.
Thank you, مشكورين. Thank you. Bye bye.
Uh, yeah, I hope everything's gonna be okay with him. Um, طيب, Samira, we are going to we would like to speak with you for a much longer period, but this is like almost an hour, so we all have to sort of do our 15-minute segments, and I'll go back and forth between you and Adam. I'll let Mouin speak with Adam, but if you can tell us, Samira, at this point, given the back and forth, actually not back and forth on the Iranian side, but on the US side. We will have a segment later on social media where we talk about all the threats and all of the statements and the zigzagging that the United States has been doing, especially White House and friends, if you will. Can you tell us where we stand today in terms of what is going on regarding the war, but also from an internal perspective, if possible, and how this is being portrayed? Feel free to focus on any angle you'd like.
You're muted.
I go back to the press conference yesterday that Pete Hegseth gave with General Kane, where they sort of said, okay, Operation Epic Fury is on hold, and we're launching Operation Epic Freedom. And then today we heard that Operation Epic Freedom is no more, and that talks are underway again and negotiations are underway. America seems to be talking to itself a lot. There's a lot of back and forth between people in the administration. Maybe Pete Hegseth is just speaking to himself or to God. I don't know. But internally in Iran, when I speak to people inside the country, I know that there's been an internet blackout, but some people are able to speak through very expensive VPNs. Some people do have Starlink also. There is this real feeling of precarity, of just living under the gun, both internally and externally. A feeling of a liminal state, not knowing, should I start my life over again? Should I start going to, like, it's just this, people are in this constant feeling of being under threat. And so it's a very difficult way to live, that's the feeling inside the country. On the other hand, there's a lot of shit going on in terms of President Trump just, I don't know, there's a lot of delusion and fantasy and this regurgitation constantly of this manufacturing of saying 45,000 people were killed in January. You see that being brought up. They brought it up in the press conference yesterday again. That is an absurd number. And the real number hovers around between 6,000 to 7,000. The government says it's 3,000. It's still an atrocious number of people killed over those protests. But the fact that they keep regurgitating this 45,000, we know what that's about. That's another 40 beheaded babies. They are trying to, as I said, create some sort of atrocity propaganda to keep this war going under the auspices of a lie, right? It was the nuclear threat, which again, I'm not sure if you saw this, but Trump, to little children who were visiting the White House yesterday, as he sat in the Oval Office looking at these kids, and told them that the US obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities, and that if they hadn't, those children would have been dead in 2 weeks. He actually said Iran was coming to kill you. So the mind of Donald Trump is not all there at all. And so I think the entire world, I tweeted out yesterday, I hope that the world survives America's epic freedom, fury, and failure. And it's just this spiral, and it's taking us all down with it, it feels like.
Given that, you mentioned atrocity propaganda, and usually atrocity propaganda is promoted in order to justify and legitimize and promote war. But here you're dealing with an administration which, as you said, is all over the place. In the morning, it threatens total war. In the afternoon, it says that it has received unconditional surrender. And in the evening, it proceeds to propose negotiation. So I'm wondering, how does, in your view, how is a propaganda kept up with this? Because you can't be promoting atrocity propaganda when you're getting ready, supposedly, to either declare victory or negotiate an agreement. And similarly, you can't be talking about how wonderful relations are between the United States and Iran when you're getting ready to launch another bombing campaign.
It's really, I guess, in a lot of ways jarring. I mean, it's, oh, you're dealing almost with this bipolar administration
Yes.
that refuses to take its medication. You know, it's not something that the Iranians can take seriously, because at the same time as you hear this rhetoric, you're also seeing these memes come out from the White House. You know, and it's not just Trump portraying himself as Jesus. Yesterday, I can't recall what it was, but it was basically Trump as this. It was like a Star Wars figure, you know, may the fourth be with you. And Pete Hegseth constantly saying that they've never had a better commander in chief, and, you know, regurgitating this, all of this Christian nationalist Jesus crap. I mean, I understand that, you know, Iran is portrayed as a theocracy and is a theocracy in many ways, but you're also dealing with this weird administration that, you know, invokes Jesus and God at every turn. And maybe in Trump's case, you know, he's not that much of a believer, but he still utilizes this. But you do have a Pete Hegseth that really believes that this is God's plan, that he is doing God's work. Now, in terms of the propaganda, yes, you might see, you know, from morning, noon, and night on the part of the U.S. administration, things changing. But Iranians inside the country have a lot of propaganda leveled at them from these satellite channels that are beamed into the country, and I'm referring to you know, these pretend media outlets like
But
Iran
Iran
International.
International, yeah.
Yeah, Iran International, Manoto, Iran International, who was the first source for that 45,000 killed, you know, who came out with that number even before the end of those 2 days. They had come out with this number. So that's really who everybody is taking, you know, this stuff from. And it's been very effective. It's have a huge impact on the Iranian community, both inside the country and in diaspora. And I come back to the first day of this war on February 28th, when 168 school children were killed in a double tap strike on a primary school. It was a lot of people, and I know we're going to talk about social media later, but it was a lot of people in the Iranian community with hundreds of thousands of followers who came out with a three-part lie. The first one being that this isn't in Minab, which is in Hormuzgan province, that it's actually in Peshawar, Pakistan. That was the first lie. The second lie was that this isn't a real school, it's actually a you know, IRGC base. And of course, the third one being Iran did this themselves and are blaming the US, Israel. It was our own community that was promulgating this lie and basically whitewashing the crimes of the United States. And to this day, you would be hard pressed to find, particularly in the diaspora, any vigils happening for this school children, any condemnations for this strike. These children were treated as collateral damage. And so that has been really heartbreaking for a lot of people in our community to watch.
Um, can I maybe turn it to Adam? Adam, you've just written a book, How to Sell a Genocide. And if we can just first turn the discussion a bit to Iran, given what Samira has just said, do you recognize a lot of similar themes emerging today in the war against Iran that you observed in efforts to whitewash the Gaza genocide? You're muted.
Forgive me. Yeah, there are pretty many carbon copies. The first of which is that on the issue of the Manab school bombing, the New York Times took 5 days to attribute that to the U.S.-Israeli airstrike, or a joint U.S.-Israeli airstrike. Now, I knew they needed to investigate to determine if it was Israel versus the U.S., but prior to the October 17th bombing of Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza, there was a standard of evidence that the country doing 99% of the bombing was assumed to be responsible for the bombing. And then after the Zionist cry bully campaign against CNN and New York Times, and we know documented, and, as well as others, they changed the standard to where they would not ascribe a blame for a bombing to Israel without the IDF themselves actively confirming it. That is policy at the New York Times and CNN. That is not a policy that exists in any other context. And by the transitive property, that level of editorial proof was then transferred over to the U.S. as well when they started bombing Iran. Now, of course, the very next day, an Iran bombing partly hit a synagogue in Tel Aviv, and that, of course, did not take 5 days to confirm. It was just assumed to be Iran within minutes. And repeatedly, when I asked the New York Times why they have this double standard of attribution, they never get back. And so it seems maybe somewhat minor, but the outrage of that school bombing was severely undone and dulled by the fact that they did not initially ascribe it to the U.S. and Israeli bombing coalition. And in fact, they took 5 days to do so, and almost every outlet had some version of blast or bombing or this kind of unattributed, vague killing out of nowhere. So we see that playbook being transported over to Iran. We also have probably the most naked example of double standards about this popular definition of human shielding. So the word human shielding has a very specific definition in international human rights law. It's when you, at gunpoint, force someone to protect you from enemy fire or to go clear out a room of bombs, etc. This is how it's defined by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International. But through a kind of racist vibes, it became any guerrilla fighter in proximity to civilians in the context of Gaza. But that's, of course, not what the word human shields means. This is why no human rights group has ever endorsed that definition as it's broadly used by Jake Tapper, the New York Times, David Leonard, and others. However, we saw in the first few weeks of the U.S. bombing Iran, the U.S. effectively evacuated its military bases and scattered them in civilian hotels and in civilian office parks. And no one pointed out that this was literally the definition used by mainstream media as human shields. That they were using civilian infrastructure to position military assets, and did so without warning the people who were not hostiles in those hotels. Now, Iran, I believe, struck 500 of these hotels and office spaces, and supposedly didn't kill any civilians, which is a remarkable degree of accuracy. I'm not quite sure how accurate that is, but that's according to the New York Times. But nevertheless, they endangered those civilians pretty openly. And so right away in the first few weeks, we had this very naked, it's very rare in my business that you have such an obvious glaring double standard. And the fact that the U.S. panicked and hit its ass, and actually NBC News in January of 2026, weeks prior to the bombing, even said that they were, quote, getting them out of harm's way. Which of course is the largest, military in human history, attacking a country whose military budget is 1/100th of theirs. The fact that they need to scatter them among civilians to get them out of harm's way certainly doesn't look good optically, but also I think exposes how racist and how ad hoc this concept of human shielding is. And then of course you have the atrocity propaganda you mentioned, which violates the most basic laws of physics, to put it bluntly. And no one's really bothering to fact check or cite any of that, because even anti-government human rights groups don't even give you numbers that high. It's really the kind of floppy, openly Zionist or CIA-funded dissident groups that get greedy. And the reason why they wanted to get it up to mid five figures is because I think they aesthetically wanted parity with the Gaza death count. So they could do this kind of whataboutery, where they randomly decide to care about various human rights violations to deflect from Israeli war crimes, and that's just been repeated. It's repeated by the White House. Hasn't really been debunked or problematized even in U.S. media, despite the fact that everybody knows it's horseshit. I mean, I don't think anyone. I mean, the New York Times doesn't use that number, but it is used by politicians repeatedly, and no one really double sort of checks on it, because you need this kind of liberal inciting incident or ostensibly human rights narrative, despite the fact that Trump doesn't really give a shit and has never really claimed to give a shit. And in fact, I think when in late January, when he sent out that tweet or Truth Social talking about how Iran must not fire on protesters, and of course we now know based on Israeli media accounts, Israel was heavily involved in many of those agitations. Obviously, much of it is organic as well. I don't want to flatten it entirely, but Israel's openly said, Trump has openly said that they sent guns via the Kurds in Iran. Again, we can debate what percentage that is, and I think that's a healthy conversation to have, but we know that they're at least taking credit for it, or taking credit for part of it. And so I think that they wanted to sort of, when he sent that tweet, he said, like, if you fire on protesters, we're going to come liberate them. And that was the first time in history, in his 5 years and change of being president, that he'd ever even claimed to care about human rights. Now, this is one of these, silver linings with Trump, is he doesn't do the liberal imperialist claptrap. He's just like, I want their oil, or I want to kill them because they're Iranians. He doesn't really do the Samantha Power, Tony Blinken crocodile tears routine, but he did it for Iran. And I think the reason why they felt they had to do it is because they didn't really have anything else. They had no real motive or inciting incident to attack Iran. And I think they needed to kind of run through the motions to get some of the liberal media buy-in. Again, it was, as you noted, it was pretty half-ass. But nevertheless, this number is just this thingamajig you throw out to make it look vaguely Holocausty, and to justify why they need to keep pursuing regime change. And I think they know full well they can't. They know that, according to the New York Times report, Netanyahu oversold it. I think Trump knew what he was getting into, because, to be honest, after 25 plus years of Netanyahu being in power, if you're getting sold on his bill of goods, that's on you. I mean, truly, like, who are these people that think, oh yeah, regime change in Iran, that should be easy? You have to be, and of course they staff everything with FDD, ideologues who do begin to some extent to believe to begin to sniff their own, they sort of get high on their own supply.
Sorry to interrupt you, Adam, but
please.
To be clear, FDD is the
Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which was originally founded in 2001 as Emet, which is Hebrew for the truth. Their goal was explicitly to, quote, enhance the image of Israel in North America, unquote. And then after 9/11, they hastily changed their name to Foundation for Defense of Democracies to give themselves this like broad Western, because Israel is quantum. It's both indigenous and Eastern, but also Western when it needs to be, depending on the PR needs at the moment. And they wanted to kind of group it in with this broader war on terror narrative. And so they're staffing these negotiations. Of course, they basically ran the Trump State Department in the first term. They basically run the State Department for Trump in the second term. And these are hardcore regime change ideologues that are funded by 5 97-year-old Zionist billionaires. And their job is to promote regime change in Iran. And the fact that it's impossible doesn't really matter. They sort of want to test the fence. And they don't care how many people die, how many schoolgirls are blown up, how many Iranians suffer, that they, again, sometimes feign like they care about, but mostly don't. And they've completely ingratiated themselves in mainstream media. They're treated as legitimate experts, despite the fact that they're just a very, very thinly veiled Israel lobbying organization. And they've sold this idea that regime change is possible, but of course I think that's their blue sky. I think their more realistic plans were to try to fragment the country and provoke a civil war, and to try to promote sectarianism and ethnic separatism. And that also failed, because when people are attacked, they become nationalists. That's it's human psychology 101. And I think that the Trump administration, this is me speculating a little bit, but if you'll indulge me, I think there's these dogmas, these taboos you're not supposed to talk about, that people ideologically and rhetorically box themselves into, that make a legitimate off-ramp or quote unquote peace deal impossible. We saw this with Gaza when they came out and said Hamas must be defeated, something that everyone knows is by definition impossible. So everything that follows from that is just killing an arbitrarily high number of Palestinians and ethnic cleansing. There's another dogma that's in a taboo that's emerged with respect to Iran, that like Iran cannot get any concessions at all. They can't get any war reparations for the billions of dollars in damage caused by this unprovoked attack, for the 3,000 to 4,000 people who've been killed, including those schoolgirls. And unlike previous, but prior to February 28th, Iran can close the Strait of Hormuz and say, well, we have a reason to do that. We need some kind of recompense for your violating our sovereignty and slaughtering our civilians. and there's not really a moral high ground that, even countries like China aren't even really disputing that. You know what I mean? That's like, because they could have easily closed the strait whenever they wanted, but now they have a moral argument to do it, a narrative argument to do it, that I think most people kind of think is justified, right? Like they need to get some kind of assurances, actual assurances from third parties, because all Trump does is lie and deceive and sneak attack. Because again, they were in negotiations when they bombed the schoolgirls. This was supposedly a good faith negotiation. And again,
in
whether
June,
it's what,
yeah, in June they were
sorry,
also in negotiations when they bombed.
right.
Yeah.
So it's like, why would
June
they
of
take
last
anything they
year.
say seriously without genuine third party assurances? And they know that, so they've boxed themselves into this position where they can't look like they're weak or they lost. But at the same time, the markets are saying, please God, stop this. This is insane. Oil's about to go to $150. And so I think that's why you get this incoherent policy, because they can't come out and say, and honestly, a lot of Democrats like Chris Murphy aren't helping, because they're attacking Trump from the right, saying, this is a giveaway. Reparations would be a giveaway to Iran when they first announced the 10-point plan. And it's like, what do you expect Iran to do? Like, you can't sneak attack someone, kill 3,000, to 4,000 people, blow up a school, and say, oh, oopsies, never mind. Let's just go back to the status quo.
Thank you, Adam. Before I move to our next guest who just joined us, and I'll reveal his face and name soon, let me just say that we shouldn't be too hard on the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And I have proof. In 2005, I interviewed the director, Mr. Clifford May, and it turns out that the foundation is probably one of the institutions that promoted and popularized even further this famous sentence, which he actually said in the documentary. The documentary was on the discourse on the global war on terrorism, on the U.S. global war on terrorism, and he basically made the very progressive statement that not all Muslims are terrorists,
Oh, okay.
but all terrorists are Muslim.
By
Ah,
definition.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
there you
yeah. I
go.
mean, yeah. You have to wait for the second part, which is really cool.
Naturally,
طيب.
yeah.
So we're going to move to next to our guest colleague and friend, Professor Adel Iskandar, who is actually a associate professor of global communication at Simon Fraser University, where he is director of the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies and the chair of graduate كتير هيك يا عادل, the chair of graduate studies in the School of Communication. He's also a جدلية co-editor. أهلا وسهلا عادل, كيفك?
Hi, Bassam. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
We can even
Adil,
see you.
welcome again. You are a fixture. Given that this program is on media, actually you should be in my seat, but we are happy that you joined, and I would like to ask you something about the veracity and the potential ways of how do you confirm what is news and what is not? And this is something that you and I spoke about. And at this point, when there's so much chaos, and of course the multitude of sources of news and so on, how do you suggest one navigates, even if the basics are not a puzzle? But sometimes I find myself about to retweet or announce something, and I feel that it sounds a bit shady, and I sort of take pause. So can you share with us some of your thoughts?
Thank you so much, Bassam. I just want to first start out by saying that I'm thoroughly enjoying and learning a lot from the conversation that started with Samira and Adam. Really, just absolutely insightful in so many different ways. And I just also want to clarify that I'm no longer director of graduate studies in my school, so that's one thing to get rid of, and you really need to abbreviate that bio anyway. I'm going to say really quickly that we are, the fact that Ted Turner died today is not lost on us in very peculiar ways, because we're so accustomed to the history of the fog of war, particularly when it comes to American military misadventures around the world, but more specifically in the Middle East. Ted Turner is often credited, and you'll see CNN rolling out kind of the red carpet in this regard. CNN is very excited about Ted Turner having started the 24-hour all news cycle in journalism around the clock, that anytime you need news, it's there for you. And the emergence of that model has sort of transformed the way in which we think about information and news. News is happening even when nothing is unfolding. And that happened during the first Gulf War with, and those of you or those of us who might have been around at the time, the Peter Arnett's and the Bernard Shaws, there's like names that were created during that time involving a significant U.S.-led and sizable military intervention that was then, at the very least, supported by the United Nations Security Council, because back then the United States at least sought kind of a facade or some sort of international legal justification for those interventions. In this case, in 1991, to liberate Kuwait. Today, we're in a completely different news environment, an ecosystem that's so busy, so loud, so cacophonous. I'm going to argue that this is just news glut, right? And so the adage that Trump is often credited with, this idea of fake news, is certainly not his. News has been faked from the time of propaganda, dating back, and propaganda is often assumed as the language, and this is the articulation that we use to describe our political adversaries. But for the most part, the United States and the UK and various other imperial powers have been producing propaganda for a very long time. I'll remind our viewers and our listeners that there was a time when the BBC World Service was known unequivocally and unabashedly as Empire Radio. And of course, there were offices for media war produced by the United States during the Second World War and during the Cold War. So it was really of course, and propaganda has now been rehabilitated in the form of like public diplomacy and all those types of things. Today, we're living in a world where it is much more difficult to be able to decipher and disentangle reality from fiction. Fake news is everywhere, and it's not just what Trump calls or chooses to describe it as fake news. I would argue that most of the things that he calls fake news are attempts at actually producing critical journalistic coverage. This is the kind of stuff that would be would be credited with or should be awarded like the Edward R. Murrows and the Pulitzers and those types of prizes for really professional. I shouldn't say professional because I think most of us here recognize that professional journalism has now become so significantly mainstreamed, but I should say independent and critical and alternative news coverage. But right now, the situation is so confusing. There's so much glut, there's so much filler, so much oversupply and surplus, a real excess of crap and garbage out there. And a lot of it is very algorithmically generated, and it has clear intentions, but sometimes it's very difficult for us to be able to figure out what's what anymore. The intentions are often to try and deconstruct an existing political narrative. So, for example, any case against the US and Israeli war on Iran, as well as the Israel's genocide in Gaza and continued apartheid and displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank and various other iterations, including the outright decimation and ethnic cleansing of southern Lebanon and South Beirut. All of those are being deconstructed in the mainstream media through noise, excessive noise. And this is a real noise machine. During the during the Bush era, during the second Iraq war, of course, one loses count after a certain point. But in 2003, there was a tendency for us to talk about how there's a sort of an attempt to distract us from the reality of the war as it was unfolded. And this was the time when there was embedded reporting. Now you don't even need embedded reporters. You don't need anyone on the ground for the most part. You can distract and divert and redefine the entire news narrative by simply mass producing total garbage. There are platforms, for those of us who spend a lot of time following the news, and I know everybody in this company does that as well, you'll realize that you spend more of your time trying to figure out what the platforms that are relaying information actually are. There are platforms that simply don't exist in the real world. What started off as attempts at like search engine optimization, all that SEO stuff, where you increase visits to your website and platforms by increasing visibility to your products, has turned into completely fictional online platforms, entirely ghost operations. And there's so many, I don't want to belabor you with this, but every time you look up information or search for information online, trying to figure out what the source has become very confusing. I'll give you one quick example. There's one platform that I stumbled on, one of hundreds, literally. It's called Middle East Briefing. Middle East Briefing is basically an investment firm, right? That's based presumably in India, but may not be. That has AI generated news that is scraped from the internet and produced in such a way so as to describe circumstances happening in the Gulf to encourage investors to continue supporting businesses in the United Arab Emirates and other locales. And then there are others that pose as travel and world tour websites, but are actually content generators on news. The most explicit version of that is one that's called IS Real or Israel. It's a play on words, Israel News. And this is really quite magnificent in its absurdity because it's an audio briefing service that delivers daily news on global affairs and the Israel-Iran conflict in that construction. And the service explicitly states that it is a mix of AI generated presenter voices and avatars alongside human narration. And it's funny because it's described as real, but in reality, it is entirely fictionalized. Now, it's important to note that it's very difficult to disentangle what they're getting from the real world and what is fictional. And right now, we also have these war rooms and dashboards and DIY intelligence platforms. Basically, it is so confusing so as to feed into this machinery, a machinery that whose objective, in my humble opinion, is to create what one might describe as the liar's dividend, where the prevalence of fake news makes it easier for bad actors like the United States and Israel in this case to dismiss real evidence of war crimes and civilian casualties as AI generated propaganda. And the opposite becomes true as well, where fake footage is then perceived as real and real footage is perceived as fake. So this is the environment that we're in, and it puts so much pressure on those of us. I mean, we are dedicated to this because most of us are either journalists or academics who are actively involved in this, but the average consumer of news simply doesn't have the time, the bandwidth, or the wherewithal, and perhaps even the media literacy to be able to disentangle all of this to find the reality on the ground. So this is the crisis that we're dealing with. It is a crisis of journalism, and journalism is now a dying profession at the hands of cyborgs and algorithms.
I mean, Adel and
Adel,
I, yeah, Adel, I think, whenever I tell people that Canadians can't even see the news on social media, they can't believe it. In Canada, we have a bill called Bill C-18, which prevents all Canadians from seeing Reuters, AP, whatever, Al Jazeera. They can't see it on in their social media feeds. So that leaves a massive vacuum, where people, like my mother or my aunt or my uncle or my cousins will say things to me like, "Oh, so and so is dead," and I'll say, "Where did you hear that?" And they'll say, "Oh, it was in my phone." No byline, no verification of anything. They just, and then they reshare that, right? And they just think because it's there, it's glossy, it has a date and a big headline, that it's real. And it doesn't look like our government or at any time wants to do away with this bill. I think it's this online news act that we have is very dangerous.
Samira, I
Absolutely.
have a
Yeah.
question for you. But first, Adil, امتى لحقت تحضر? When did you get a chance to prepare? You only found out you're on 20 minutes ago.
I'm still preparing as we speak.
This is like Sinan and I finishing our papers on the Mesa panel, in the back in the day. Samira, I have a very quick question about some of the experience that you've had. Essentially, the first question is, why do monarchists love you so much? And second,
Oh,
what happened? There were a lot of a lot of stories, including some vandalism. I mean, there was a lot going on, and can you bring this into the conversation? Not just the anecdotes, but they're important, but also. Have you been able to witness from, let's say, the day or even before the war started, few days or few couple weeks before the war started, and today, has there been a change in terms of the intensity and the breadth of the vigor and the sort of hysteria? Because I also, you may or may not know, I also got my share of it for making a satirical comment about Laura Loomer, and it was pretty vicious. It went nowhere because they were just ridiculous. I mean, their claims they were making. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And how the news cycle affects that. Adel talked about some of the sources that actually feed into that hysteria.
I mean, I go back to the satellite channels, which are basically these propaganda Persian language channels that feed into Iran, and are eaten up also by the diaspora. What happens when you have a government like the Iranian government that also, its state media lies a lot to the public? So you get a public that, it's not that they believe the lie, it's just that they don't believe anything anymore. The ability to differentiate between a lie and a truth is the point. It's within that chaos that you can do whatever you want with that type of population. You can manipulate them as much as you like, and that's basically what's happening right now. But what we're seeing, and you referred to, I think the word you used was fervor, there is a real fascistic, nationalistic element right now within. I'm Iranian Canadian, so I can only speak to what I see that's in front of my nose. But our community, for instance, was never carrying Israeli flags before. Now you're seeing at Iranian protests people carrying Israeli flags. And this is because there are pages like Israel in Farsi on Instagram, which has more than 1 million followers, speaks directly in Persian to Iranians inside the country, and pushes, this notion that we Iranians and the Jewish people are the oldest people, they have a biblical connection, and that Israel is the only country that really cares about Iranians, who's always been there for Iranians, and who will never leave Iranian people's sides. You heard Benjamin Netanyahu, for instance, in December 2024, speaking Persian to people, saying, woman, life, freedom. He said it in Persian, Zan, Zendegi, Azadi, and is constantly telling people in Iran to rise up, take their country. We are there with you on the ground. Mossad put out that statement when protests started in Iran in late December of 2025, that, take to your streets, we are beside you. You've heard Israeli ministers like Gila Gamliel making this AI slop of, Iranian women sort of taking off their burqas, which is not something women in Iran even wear. And so, you're seeing, again, as you saw in the war on terror, where Afghan women were utilized, now they're utilizing Iranian women as a way to manufacture consent for this war. So all of this is happening all at the same time. But what you're seeing within the diaspora specifically is a very violent, and I use that term on purpose, it's violent. It has become physically violent. There has been a murder now in Vancouver, in British Columbia. There was a protester there killed by allegedly two monarchist type people, who this person who was murdered, Masoud Masjoudi, was taking to court for threatening him. Months before he was murdered, he was sounding the alarm, saying that he's under threat. We're seeing a lot of people at these protests threatening other people. There's been stabbings in London of anti-war Iranians. So there's a real, rather than this movement sort of dying down, you're seeing that sort of splintering that Max Weber talked about in social movements, where you get a group of people who see that the movement is sort of watering down, and they splinter off and become even more, even more hardline, even more radical and violent. And that's really what we're seeing right now. In the UK, in London, just last week, there were a group of Iranians, dozens and dozens and dozens of them, dressed in black shirt, marching in the streets, saying one flag, one leader, one nation. I mean, that's reminiscent of what we heard in Nuremberg, Eine Volke, eine Führer. Like this is the level of what we're witnessing. And unfortunately, I just don't think when the media covers what is going on within Iran, they are not, particularly the mainstream media, they are not focusing on what is happening inside our community. They're just like, wow, look at all these people marching together. Look at the unity, without understanding really what's going on. There is a whole slew of people who are being sidelined, threatened, harassed on a daily basis. They're also being doxxed. And so it's a very dangerous time, and there's not much focus on it, unfortunately.
Thank you, Samira. For our final question, I'd like to turn to Adam and say much of what Samira just said kind of resonated in terms of what we've seen with respect to protests against the Gaza genocide in recent years. And Adam, I'd like to ask you specifically about your book, How to Sell a Genocide. It's forthcoming, I believe, this month or next month. Sorry, you're muted. You're still muted.
Okay, let's try that one more time.
There
Okay,
you go.
sorry. Ostensibly, I podcast for a living. You think I would? Yes, it published 2 weeks ago.
It was published 2 weeks ago. Well,
Yeah,
congratulations.
so it's thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah, no, it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
And
maybe you
I,
could take.
and
Yeah, go
well,
ahead, Bassam.
I think Samira said something. I think she said congratulations, but I would like to interject to say that right before you joined, before 3 p.m., Mouin, I made a promise to Adam that we're going to host him on a longer form segment
Yes,
about his work.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. But I'd like to ask you, just as a preview, why you felt it was important to write your book. What was it really? Are we talking about the mainstream media essentially having done the heavy lifting for Biden, Netanyahu, and now Trump?
Yeah, I wanted to quantifiably. There's a ton of data in the book. We spent a very long time working on that data. I wanted to quantify double standards, quantify an asymmetry in sympathy, obviously an asymmetry in emotive words, Israelis versus Palestinians. Like, it's all in there. There's about 26 points of data that I think kind of prove what I think a lot of people intuitively suspect, or the general impression they have, but I wanted to show it so we could sort of get past this idea that this is a contested space and show definitively, beyond a reasonable doubt, that American quote unquote mainstream media, right? It's not a perfect term, and I go into that and why I chose that term, and I use the term center left or liberal media, mainstream media as it were, why they were so essential to selling a genocide in the actual sense of the word. I didn't just the headlines or the title's not meant to just be provocative. I think that around October 7th and 8th, there was basically consensus that at most a genocide, at best, they were going to kill some arbitrarily high number of Palestinians as medieval recompense, and everybody needed to get on board. And then from there, we reverse engineered all the excuses and sophistries and narratives. And I detail that, and I try to show that quantitatively. It's a book that's for like a fence-sitting liberal who doesn't necessarily, who doesn't necessarily know or have all the ammunition to argue it, and it provides that for them and goes meticulously through each. And of course, it has reporting. Mostly done by my partner Sarah Lazar, since I'm not a journalist by trade, I'm a media critic. And then we talked with journalists inside CNN, LA Times, etc. And I just wanted to show beyond a reasonable doubt that the media, quantitatively, by the media I mean the New York Times, Washington Post, Axios, AP, that they continually obfuscated, lied, trafficked in racist tropes and dehumanizing language and double standards that set the stage for and made genocide inevitable. And so I thought it was important to create a document for that. And I know others have done similar studies with British media, and I know others are doing broader studies as well that are coming soon, and I look forward to reading those. But I just wanted to make sure that there was a documentation of that, and then that way we could move towards accountability, because obviously the lies that sold the Iraq War never had any accountability. Other lies during Vietnam never really had any accountability. In fact, the main promoter of the biggest lie of the Iraq War, which is that Saddam Hussein had links to 9/11, Jeffrey Goldberg now runs the Atlantic magazine, which I single out as the biggest promoter of. Yeah, I singled them out as probably, along with the New York Times, as the single most sort of openly genocidal and lying. In fact, they're one of the publications that actually published the beheaded babies lie and refuses to retract it. And so yeah, that we were just going to keep repeating this cycle because obviously, like, it's too late. You can't go back in time. But I think there's something to be said for accountability. I think there's something to be said for truth for its own sake, and that's why I wrote it.
And
For the
I
record.
guess now we're in the stage of how to sell a ceasefire.
Well, actually, the deliberate ambiguity and contortion and redefinition of ceasefire during Gaza, the Gaza so-called ceasefire talks, is a central theme of the book. In fact, I spent probably the equivalent of maybe 20, 25 pages on it because that was one of the ways in which they bought Biden time. They created a totally fictitious ceasefire theater that was never, and then they redefined the term ceasefire to mean Hamas surrender, which in 5,000 years of human warfare is not what the term ever meant. But then on or around March 1st of 2024, that became the new definition that the media largely just accepted and went with, despite the fact that it was fundamentally based on a paradox. But that's a whole different conversation.
Samira, I interrupted
they
you.
always call it a fragile ceasefire. They always add some sort of term in front of it to to give it some sort of, it's still there, it's just only there on the one side. As Adam pointed out, now we have this double-sided ceasefire. We never
Yes.
used this language before. And then we also have, there's a whole lexicon to this genocide that I think I would love to see someone write a book on it. New terms created, like non-combative propagandists. This is a term that Israel came up with in order to murder journalists. Non-combative propagandist. I'd never heard that before. Or even the term Hamas-run health ministry. I was at the public broadcaster here in Canada, the CBC, for 10 years as a host and producer. And we never used the term ever of Hamas-run health ministry.
That was not used widespread until the Ali hospital bombing on October 17th. And then the ADL basically told everyone they had to use it. And in fact, we document from October 7th to October 17th, it was not used once on CNN or MSNBC. And then they proceeded to use it hundreds of times over the next few months, which we document graphically and quantitatively, because they needed to create a soft genocide denial. They needed to create liberal approved genocide denial. Because if you say Hamas run and then you list off, 200-300 dead for that day, liberals can just go, it's probably just a bunch of terrorist propaganda. So we go into great detail about Hamas run. That was I think, along with human shields, was the central kind of numbing agent for liberals to kind of look the other way as the body counts increasingly got more and more obscene.
I actually saw, Adam, I saw Honest Reporting. I'm not sure if you look at them, they're this mouthpiece media.
Yeah.
They refer to themselves as media watchdog, but they're a mouthpiece for Israel. They operate here in Canada too, but they congratulated themselves in late October for getting the media to use this term, Hamas-run health ministry.
And notably, they quietly dropped it at around mid 2024. Many outlets did, because they realized that it served one functional purpose. And of course, they never mentioned that the Hamas-run health ministry has a history of being very credible. It's used by the State Department. It's used by the UN. It's used by Mossad. And in fact, when there was a study comparing the Hamas-controlled health ministry versus the IDF's own figures in 2014, there was a difference of only 7%. So everybody knows that they're credible numbers, if not severe undercounts. But everyone had to fake like they didn't know that, so they could just use this racist, thingamajig to throw in front of a death count to discredit it, and to buy themselves time, which is fundamentally what the goal was. It was to kind of buy time.
And your book, Adam, How to Sell a Genocide: The Media's Complicity in the Destruction of Gaza, by Adam Johnson, is now out from Pluto Press. So, Adam, Samira, Adel, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Media Wars. And of course, also thanks to Nabih, who unfortunately had to leave us early. Bassam, any
Absolutely.
final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that everyone here, including actually, especially Nabih, because he had to leave early, are going to be invited back. Adam, we would love to speak with you about your book. I did not get enough. I would like to learn more and host you for an extended segment. Samira, we could talk for a very long time, and we will also ask you to join us. Also, sort of like one on one or one on two, because apparently Mu'in and I cannot do anything without each other as hosts. And Adil, انت يعني you have no choice. You're going to be invited back. Thank you all so much. We actually are not done. We're done with this segment right now. Mu'in and I, because this is the first time we do this live. Mu'in and I are going to go into the rogue version of Media Wars, and we're going to go over some tweets, quite a bit of tweets under various categories: U.S., Iran, Gaza, Hasbara, media, and so on. And we're going to just read them out, share them, say a couple words about a few things by way of addressing these media wars that we are, dealing with. So in the meantime, I would like to extend my gratitude to everyone here for your generosity and for coming on to this program. And please be safe, and we will see you again. And stay strong. We're going to need it, especially now when actually we can actually, for the first time, in my view, in decades, on certain issues, we are actually able to move the needle, not just hold
Yeah.
steady. We are able actually to move the needle in the direction that benefits the overwhelming majority of humans. طيب. شكرا.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
سلام. معين.
Sam.
سلام عادل حبيبي, شكرا. Hey, how are you?
There we are.
1 second. Let me just. There we go. كيفك معين? We have about 45 minutes to go through like a slew of a lot of things that I will be sharing next. Um, any final words about our conversation? I really wish we could have had more time with each of them.
Yeah, but I think keeping it short and sweet has its benefits too. I thought it was a very insightful discussion, and I
Absolutely.
thought it was. I also liked having different guests addressing different topics on at the same time.
Yes. Um, I actually enjoyed that as well, and I think doing it live is actually can be a bit more pressing, but also a bit more efficient. طيب, and speaking of efficiency, let's move to uh, the part where we talk about media posts. So
Yes,
here we go. Are you ready? Are you ready,
I'm
Moin? Do you
ready.
need to take a sip of something?
I'm good.
طيب. There we go. Oh man, I have so this is live, so we need to move it. Okay, there we go.
You're muted.
So we're gonna start, and we'll quickly go through this. I'll give you the cue here and there, but I'll sort of lead us so we can get through like literally.
You're muted.
Sorry, this is very strong, very weird. This is Glenn Deason, who is actually a decent, quite a decent analyst, and he addresses Europe. Here, he shares Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio argues that Operation Epic Fury is concluded, as the objectives were achieved. In reality, Iran won this war. There was no regime change, no nuclear deal, no limits on of ballistic missiles, and the rest of it. And of course, let me just read a couple of things. No limits of ballistic missiles and drones, no decoupling of ties between Iran and its regional allies, and the Strait of Hormuz is now under Iran's control. U.S. bases in the region have been destroyed. The U.S. alliance system has been weakened, and the petrodollar will not recover. Anything to share?
Um, no, that sounds about right. Although I think he's maybe exaggerating about the petrodollar, but as Samira said, Operation Epic Failure.
Absolutely. All right. This is the Iran portion, by the way. Next, the team behind the Iranian Lego videos was previously highly critical of the government, exactly the kinds of people Israel and the US idiotically thought would support regime change. Our interview with them here, this is interesting and important because of the video. I'll play a little bit of the video here.
Have you seen the viral
Oh,
Lego style
no.
animation?
Sorry, we're not going to play a little bit of the video. I thought it was the actual video, but this is a very interesting interview with the creators that I think is worthwhile, especially if you're curious about who is producing all these videos. And I think we don't end up seeing the person; we end up seeing just a silhouette
Say
of the
sorry.
person.
Enthusiasm
So
I
we're gonna
can
actually skip
Mira.
that and go to Glenn Greenwald. If you ask 15 people who are mega followers what the Iran war aim was, you'll hear 15 different answers because Trump gave a different goal every day. Here's what he said was his main goal on the day of the war. Trump, freedom for Iran goal for of major is goal of major military operation. All right, let's move on to Amir. This is actually again we quote Amir quite a bit. I think he hails from Germany. He's I think a neurosurgeon or something of the sort. He's a doctor. From a failed coup to a failed regime change operation and a failed attempt to kill diplomacy and send Iran, an isolated and sanctioned nation, back to the Stone Age, we have arrived at a point where Iran has now dictated the terms for the ceasefire to the US, has managed to put a leash on Israel as the first and only country in the world to protect its allies, and so on and so forth. This is, run of the mill analysis right now on what is going on, especially if somebody's paying attention. And Asal, sorry, shouldn't pronounce it the Arab way. Asalrad quotes Bloomberg saying Mossad says Israel will keep trying to topple Iran's government. And she comments, this should help us, this should help US Iran talks and clearly isn't meant to derail the ceasefire. So this
Of
is,
course not.
and yeah, do you want to say anything about this?
No, it's quite clear that for Israel, the nightmare scenario is peace.
All right. And then finally, on this category, uh, the Washington Post. This is from Dropsite News, which I urge everyone to follow at Dropsite News. Washington Post: Iran damaged 228 U.S. military structures, far more than officially acknowledged. A
This is
Washington
really a
Post
big
analysis of
story.
more than 100 Iranian released satellite images verified against European Union satellite data found that Iranian strike damaged or destroyed at least 228 structures, 228 structures, that is, and pieces of equipment across 15 U.S. military sites in the Middle East since February 28. I read this because I have shared with you, Mu'in, and I've shared in other areas where I spoke, either interviewed or was interviewed, that we have not yet seen the full effect on the Arab Gulf states, and we will not see it until this war is over. And
And
not
then
only the
some.
war, perhaps even the conflict, as Iran now has a condition that the conflict needs to end, not just the war or not just have a ceasefire. So this is worthwhile. Do you want to say anything about this dimension?
Well, this is, I think, a huge story. Not only was the United States incapable of defending its allies, it was incapable of defending itself. And every single base was hit and hit painfully. And the question now becomes, is the US actually going to seek to rebuild these facilities? Or will it, as before, as prior to the 1990 Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, keep a much smaller military footprint in this region? And if it decides to do so, that would also be meeting an Iranian demand. And it would, of course, be wonderful news for the region to have less US military intervention. So it would be a win win win.
I have a lot to say about this, but we'll go on to media, and this is a bigger category. Mondo Weiss speaks with media critic Adam Johnson, who was just with
Who's
us.
he?
ما بعرف. Um, with the media critic who was just actually with us, in case people just joined in. Adam Johnson, about his new book detailing how cable shows, newspapers, and online news sites helped build support for the mass killing of Palestinians. And of course, the emblematic figure of Jake Tapper is featured. Do you want to share anything about this, Moin?
Well, Adam's book is called How to Sell a Genocide, and I think Jake Tapper is the poster child for this. So, quite an appropriate image on this tweet.
Absolutely. Another Asal post addressing how the New York Times talked about the flotilla. Israel intercepts 8 flotilla heading to breach naval blockade of Gaza. So they are actually the ones who are breaching in international waters, mind you. So she corrects it as you see here. Israel illegally intercepts a flotilla heading to break unlawful naval blockade of Gaza. It's just unbelievable, and it doesn't stop. And it's amazing material uh, for education, right? I mean, especially at the university setting in our classrooms and so on. This is a
You know,
wonderful
I
opportunity.
also, yeah, you have to hand it to Asal, because you read these headlines so often that they become kind of normalized, and for her to be able to consistently point out what is so outrageously wrong about them and to correct them, um, uh, in an atmosphere where I think even people like you and me have reached a stage where we read these headlines and think there's nothing really unusual about them. Really, it's an amazing skill she has.
Same day, right? Which is a this is something that Alan McLeod points out regarding BBC coverage. On the one hand, they say pirates hijack oil tanker off the coast of Somalia, of course, Somali pilots. And on the same day, they have another headline: U.S. boards ship carrying Iran oil as Trump threatens mine laying vessels. This is how consent is manufactured in real time, according to Alan. Maureen, this is yours. I'll let you take it.
So the tweet reads, could you point me to a single mainstream media interview where a Jewish guest is asked to condemn Israel? And this was a response to someone, I don't remember who, saying how anytime a Jewish guest is on any media or talk show or whatever, they're always being asked to condemn Israel, whereas Palestinians get a pass. And as you know, the reality has been um, uh, that whenever any Palestinian or pro Palestinian or someone who is perceived to be ever so slightly critical of Israel appears on any program, they're always asked, do you condemn Hamas? I'm not aware of a single case where a Jewish guest on similar mainstream media programs has been asked to condemn Israel. So
Or
I
just
asked
any
the question.
guest who supports, supposedly,
Yes.
nominally supports Israel.
Yes, but this was in response to a tweet that was saying Jews were
Palestinians.
specifically being singled out
Yeah.
to condemn Israel, and there's no such thing, of course.
Here's a post by The Economist. The militia group still exists. It has politicians in Lebanon's capital as fighters and fighters in the south, but survival is not the same as strength, blah, blah, blah. So I commented, oh, wow, Hezbollah is dead again. They keep dying. And yeah, I don't know. Moving on. This is Jeremy Scahill addressing how X, which is the platform we are on now, has now removed the blue check from Iran's MFA spokesperson's account after stripping the ministry and ministers' verified badges despite our full premium plus payments and so on and so forth. This is actually a note from the source. Stripping Iranian officials, Jeremy says, of verification is insane, particularly considering the way X is used as part of the diplomatic process in this war. This encourages fake news, of course, but also part of a broader censorship campaign and so on and so forth. Mind you, a censorship campaign by the person who wanted to end censorship. Next, this is
Let me just respond. I mean,
Go ahead.
Jeremy Scahill was, when he speaks of the self-proclaimed free speech warrior, he's of course referring to Elon Musk, who claims he's a free speech absolutist, which is a phrase that's generally used by people who can't stand free speech, and this is a risk. When you put plutocrats, when you make them media proprietors, this is exactly what you would expect to happen, and it indeed has happened.
Well, by people who not can't stand free speech, but I mean they love free speech when it doesn't address what they are for.
Yes,
In
a
a
free
critical
speech
manner.
absolutist is someone who will absolutely promote free speech, provided it's something they agree with.
I have a couple of people in my own circles who actually yell at me officially because of my free speech, even though they say I'm a free speech absolutist. But this is, violates X and Y and Z, whereas the same thing that violates X, Y, and Z sort of 10 times fold on the other side is somehow not addressed. All right, going to this is basically the decision by CBS News to hire and fire as they wish. I will let the video speak for itself. Let's play it. Let me go back.
And no one even knew who Tony Dokoupil was. He was the host of that trivial chatter show, the Gossip Morning Show with Gayle King. They would have like on reality TV show contestants and like Oprah type authors. It's like a light thing for people getting their kids ready to go to school in the morning. And she elevated him. And the only thing anyone knew about Tony Dokoupil, and obviously this is all that mattered in his elevation, was that he had, in a unusually aggressive way, berated Ta-Nehisi Coates after he released his book about Israeli apartheid in the West Bank, accused Ta-Nehisi Coates of writing a book that would be found in the backpack of a radical.
And I have to say, when I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist.
Tony Dokoupil is married to an Israeli woman. Barry Weiss saw that and her eyes lit up. They have collapsed in ratings since Barry Weiss took over and they put Tony Dokoupil there. Now, I don't think David Ellison minds. I don't think she's there to boost ratings. I think she's there to turn CBS News into a propaganda outlet, a state TV outlet for Israeli TV. And if you doubt that, let's look at what just happened. A lot of people have been purged from CBS News since Barry Weiss took over. People have been there for decades, which on the one hand, just standing alone is to be expected. If you're David Ellison and you think you're hiring some like creative, young, buzzy, revolutionary type outsider, which is how they see Barry Weiss, which I'm talking about their perception there. We can talk about how hilarious that is on another day. But if you see her as that way, she's going to come in and her job is to overhaul CBS News, which has become stagnant. So a lot of people who are there for a long time are going to be replaced with people who are being brought in. That's normal. But in Barry Weiss's case, it's not that she's bringing in people with a big audience or who are likely to be watched. She's bringing in people whose only qualification is extreme loyalty to Israel. And the people she's firing, their only failing is that they're not. Here
is another instance where, let me see. Actually, not yet. We'll get to the other instance where they fired somebody in the London office. Day. Her last name is Day. We'll get to that. Israel can seize boats in international waters 1,000 kilometers away and detain civilians with barely a whisper from Western media. This is actually just another failing that, the kind of thing that you and I, Mouin, just pass by and just assume that that's the usual.
Yeah, and two of the activists on board this flotilla were in fact seized in international waters, abducted.
Illegal under international law. Israel has no jurisdiction in these waters. Intercepting or boat or
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one is a Spanish citizen, I believe, and the other is a Brazilian who tragically, I think, his mother suddenly passed away while he is in Israel's torture dungeons.
Yeah. All right. This is a headline from 1948, right? From the Sydney Daily Telegraph. It says they massacred Arab babies. And David Miller here addresses this headline and addresses the uh, sort of some of the main parts of the headline. We're just showing this as a way to look at how mainstream media today will not have this headline, that straightforward headline, right?
Yeah, no, they would publish manufactured propaganda, fabrications about beheaded Israeli babies.
Absolutely. All right. This is the Daily Wire firing half of its staff in mass layoffs. And this is all over the news, by the way. We just wanted to highlight it. This comes as co-founder Ben Shapiro has lost 85% of his YouTube audience since last year. I have not verified this. I do know that that he has lost a considerable number. So I'm making a disclaimer here. I'm not sure if it's 85%, but it is considered considerable and has actually prompted the layoffs. And there's a lot to say about Ben Shapiro, but I think we've said enough, right?
Yes, and someone in the comments, sorry, just to backtrack,
go ahead.
Clarified that one of the activists who was abducted was a dual Spanish-Swedish national.
Yeah. This is actually the latest Lego, which is, according to Trita Parsi, marks a significant pivot. Instead of taunting the U.S. military, it reflects a new chapter in which Tehran will seek peace by reaching out directly to the American people, bypassing the U.S. government. We'll just listen to a little bit of it.
From the streets of Tehran to the avenues of D.C., this isn't about hate, it's about the truth. I love your soul, America, but I can't stand your throne. Listen. Listen. I wake up in Tehran, but I'm wearing your brands. Listening to Wu-Tang while I'm washing my hands of the propaganda fed by the man in the suit. I love the fruit of your culture, just not the root of your foreign intervention. I grew up on your films, dreaming of NYC, the lights in the realms of freedom you preach. I love the jazz and the blues, but I hate how your leaders put my brothers on the news as a target, a number, a threat, and a folder. While we're just two kids getting older and colder. I love the land of the free, but not the man in the halls. I love the spirit of the street, not the height of your walls. Between your flag and my home, there's a bridge made of gold, but your leaders keep burning every story we've told. Yeah, I love the stars, but I hate the stripes they draw on my skin. You talk about liberty, but you lock the gate with sanctions that don't hit the elite. Only the plate of the mother and nice behind trying to buy bread. Your leaders aim for the crown, but hit the worker instead.
All right. Yeah, these are taking the world by storm, and it's not just the politics that is very interesting and important as an artifact, but it's also the quality of the aesthetic quality, not just the visual, but also the songs.
Yeah,
and
production values.
The production is really not what you expect in this realm, in this political realm, and it's met by on the other side from the United States White House and friends with a lot of
Trump
lame,
tweets.
no, but lame. I mean,
Yeah.
let's put politics aside for a second. It's just lame production value and aesthetics. All right, so let's go to the irony of this. Here's where we also, Glenn also talks about the letting go of folks at CBS. So we already addressed that. We'll just move on. Here we have it says from The Economist, if it starts, a nuclear arms race will be unstoppable. If more countries
As if
pursue
there's no
nuclear,
nuclear arms in the Middle East.
yeah, this is something that I know you said something about this. We'll get to it, but my comment is good. But only Westerners have used nuclear weapons so far. So worry about your part of the world. Economist hypocrisies. All right. I mean, it's really funny that that there's so much concern about nuclear weapons, and of course, if you have a shred of decency and empathy, of course, and brains, you have to be concerned. But the truth is, the fact is, it wasn't Pakistan, a Muslim country, who's used nuclear weapons prior, because the idea is that these are cultures of death. That's why we don't want Iran, or they don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But it's only the United States of America, city on a hill, the beacon of freedom and so on, that has actually used them. And of course, there's a justification, but no other country is allowed to have justification, whether it's nuclear weapons or anything else. All right. This is a list of the 260 journalists plus actually killed in Israel attacks on Gaza. I don't know what to do with this. This is very hard to just even look at. Do you want to say something about journalists, or should we move on? I mean, I don't know what to say.
Well, if you scroll up a bit, again, Amir, I think he puts it very well. One killed journalist might be a tragic accident. Two are undeniable attempts to intimidate journalists and suppress freedom of press. Over 260 dead journalists in 2.5 years is the work of the most ruthless terrorist organization. And basically, it's quite clear there's a campaign to systematically target and eliminate journalists.
Okay, so let's move quickly to the US. We're gonna go quickly, or even quicker. $50 billion to kill little girls and raise gas prices, all in the service of Israel. Imagine how that money could have helped Americans. This is in a response or in reference to a CBS News headline. U.S. officials say the Iran war's true cost is closer to 50 billion, double what the Pentagon revealed publicly on Wednesday. Coming out of CBS News, yani they're still like doing some journalism. That's not bad. The New Republic publishes this article. State Department openly admits Israel pushed us into Iran war. I don't know what to
This
make
is
of this.
based on a statement by Rubio.
Yeah,
Marco Rubio.
that's from a while ago, but it's being. I mean, this is not something that is addressed by quote unquote the fringe or the left or even quote unquote progressives. I don't know what that word means in the context of the Democratic Party or the U.S. political spectrum, but yeah, it's no longer something that is. Like literally, it's no longer something that you have to argue for, or it's a claim that's being fortified and reinforced every moment that ceasefire seems to be breached. This is yours, Mouin.
Yes. This tweet actually upset a lot of people. So let me read it and then explain why. I think the US, supported by the international community, should demand ironclad guarantees from Tehran that Iran will not be the first state to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. This should be a non-negotiable precondition for the repeal of sanctions. And a lot of people were very upset. Why would you say this? Israel already has nuclear
Because
weapons
they misunderstood.
and so on.
They misunderstood
Yes.
you, as
I mean,
usual.
this is basically, I think many people who saw this tweet are unaware that in the 70s and 80s, whenever Israel would be challenged about its possession of nuclear weapons, its standard response was Israel will not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. So Israel has never admitted to having these weapons. The US has never officially confirmed that Israel has these weapons. So this tweet is essentially saying, well, this is a game others can play as well. And it should be good enough for Iran to just make the same statement that Israel does.
You're just assuming too much sometimes about people's background knowledge. And that's fine. I mean, we're not going to stop what we're doing, because you cannot cater to a certain level of historical background, and at the same time, you can't blame everyone for not knowing all the
Well, of
details.
course, many people weren't around then, or were and weren't interested in this issue. Fair enough.
Yeah, but that's not the excuse that they weren't around then, right? It's like that cab driver that told me when I criticized some of the policies of Jamal Abdel Nasser, and he happened to be an Egyptian cab driver, and he asked me, "Were you an adult in the
Have you
60s?"
been?
No, he said, "No, no." He said, "Were you an adult in the 60s?" Because
Uh,
this is where I was critiquing some of the policies, especially regarding some of the people on the left and imprisonment and incarceration and so on. It's funny that he had like a religious symbol on his dashboard,
uh,
and I was gonna ask him, was he around when this religion that he had a symbol? I'm not gonna say which one, and people might guess the wrong one. I said, were you? I was gonna say, were you around a couple thousand years ago, Yani? معقول? Anyway, the moral panic, this is from Wonder Weiss. The moral panic over Hassan Piker's involvement with the Democratic Party is really about Palestine's growing influence in US politics. While Israel supporters might want to ban him and Palestine from the discourse, they've already lost the fight. This
yeah.
is actually a huge kind of worms. I actually went into a quick deep dive into what's happening within the centrist, or what is called sometimes the radical center of the Democratic Party. And it's remarkable how people are losing their minds over Hassan Piker.
Uh, And
Anyway,
imagine if he would just say a few nice words about Israel, it would all would be forgiven and forgotten.
Akid. Um, So, Jonathan Pollard, a former U.S. Navy intelligence analyst who served 30 years in an American prison for spying for Israel, announced on Monday that he has decided to enter Israeli politics and run in the country's next election. And I wrote, awesome for Israel's view in America, or views of Israel in America. I don't know what that, maybe that's not the best construction, but this is really, it's almost, Mouin, it's almost like every day. Those of us who are, who are nerds, who are just, glued to the news and the analysis and what's being written at all levels, social media and journal, publications that are of various varieties, as well as books and articles, including peer-reviewed articles. It's almost like every development or every other development is pushing those ratings. Let's talk about ratings now, not about policy, regarding Israel in the southern direction.
Yep.
This actually, speaking of that, let's listen to this intervention at Rutgers University after Rutgers invited an Israeli soldier, and this is by a Jewish activist who shared that his mother told him about the Holocaust.
Grandmother.
So, grandmother.
IDF has killed the IDF has killed over 70,000 Palestinians. The IDF has killed over 300 journalists. The IDF has targeted children. The IDF have killed over 1,700 healthcare workers. The IDF have targeted children. Khalid Rajab, 6-year-old, was shot 335 times. 335 times. When my grandmother, my Jewish grandmother, told me about the Holocaust, she told me never again. This is not never again. Never again means never again for everybody. And if justice is real, then the IDF will go down. You guys will be prosecuted at the Hague. You guys will go down. Justice will prevail.
Wow.
Right.
Impressive.
You haven't seen that before?
Oh, I hadn't seen it before. Very,
You're
back
not spending
in the day.
enough time. You're not spending enough time on social media, more. Trump time.
Yeah. Back in the day, when I was in college, if someone had done that, straight to prison.
Israel, no. In Israel, you could actually potentially say that.
Yeah,
Back
no,
in
I'm
the
talking
day.
about the U.S.
The US, طبعا. In Israel,
Oh,
well, not
there's
now maybe, but before
I
the
keep
genocide.
saying this. The U.S. is this unique country which gives more freedom to citizens, to journalists, to politicians. They have more freedom to criticize their own country than they do to criticize a foreign country. It's usually the other way around. You can say whatever you want about a foreign country, but you have to be polite, quote unquote, about your own country. The U.S. is the opposite. You can call for the destruction of the U.S., and it's considered freedom of speech. Call Israel a genocidal apartheid entity, and you lose everything. And you can, and even in Israel, uh, Israelis have more freedom to criticize Israel than Americans do to criticize Israel. It's incredible. I've never seen anything like it.
But there's a third model, Namuzaj Akhar, which is the UAE, where you cannot say anything about the UAE or Israel.
Yes,
I just thought about it. All right. So a revolution is underway. This is an article in Mondoweiss, a very fine publication.
Yes.
A revolution is underway within the Jewish community as youth abandon Zionism following the Gaza genocide, while the community scrambles to respond. The Israeli lobby is being fractured in the process. And of course, this is, I put this on purpose after the student spoke out that it's not an anecdote. It is a wave, and we have all addressed how this is not a reversible wave. So numbers could go up and down and fluctuate here and there, but as a general movement towards increasingly negative views of Israel, that is not reversible. And this article is worth reading because it has all of these markers in terms of analysis, polls, and stats. So check it out in Mondoweiss. It's titled "The Israel Lobby is Fracturing as Young Jews Abandon Zionism." And interestingly, like in our own lives, I mean, you're in Canada. I don't know, it's probably similar, but here in the United States, you keep finding out just by interacting that this is a reality. And even throughout the period of the genocide, from the first month to the 24th or 36, and now even more, we're like the 37th or 38th month, you see the same people who had certain views during the first month, about all sorts of things, about Hamas, about human shields, about terrorists, and so on. With time, they actually started seeing things differently. They're looking at the same thing, but they're actually seeing in real time the manifestation of the quote unquote counter argument. And recently, we have seen a lot of professors even changing their tune as to how they address the problem, and actually having the courage to begin to address it to begin with. Unfortunately, many are staying away on all sides because of the fear of reprisal.
Yeah. But it's also interesting. I mean, 30, 40 years ago, if you would run into a young Jewish person, it was a fair assumption they were Zionist, unless they were religious, and particularly if they were Orthodox. Then chances were that they were either indifferent to Zionism or hostile to it for religious reasons. Now it's the opposite, and it's the more religious and Orthodox Jews who tend to be more Zionist, while the more secular youth are either indifferent to Israel or hostile to it. And I think on account of the Gaza genocide, Israel has basically lost an entire generation of Jewish youth. So this quote, this is a tweet that I wrote. Should I read it out? It's a little long.
Just, the gist of it.
Yeah.
Mouin.
Well,
should I bring it close?
This goes to this Hasbara line, always trying to pretend that there were no Palestinians, and if there were any Palestinians, they were actually Egyptians and Lebanese and Iraqis and Nigerians and whatnot, who had basically arrived in Palestine in 1946, looking for jobs in the Zionist economy in Palestine. And the flip side of that, of course, is that the recent immigrants from Europe, the recent Jewish immigrants from Europe, had somehow been there for 3,000 years. So I was just saying how, when you look at the facts, some 65% of Israeli Jews in 1948 were in fact born abroad, while over 90% of Arabs had been born in Palestine, to parents born in Palestine, to grandparents born in Palestine. But of course, when it comes to seeking justifications for Israel, we have the right to shamelessly invert the truth, and say black is white and green is blue.
This is Trump's net worth has nearly tripled in his second term, reaching $6.5 billion. His administration is the most brazenly self enriching in American history. Um, this is what I call the Rami Makhlouf effect in America.
And maybe you should remind our viewers who Rami Makhlouf is.
Oh, Rami Makhlouf is Bashar
Was.
al-Assad's. He still is.
Okay.
Mehmet, he didn't die. No, none of them. Bashar al-Assad's cousin, who actually siphoned off via the ruling regime under Bashar, a bit under Bashar's daddy, with his father and family, but under Bashar as a result of trying to encapsulate most of the capital within people that are loyal to the regime, or super loyal, not just loyal, super loyal to the regime. He was basically in control or owned a very significant portion of the private sector assets. And of course, later, many years ago, after the uprising and so on, they parted ways, and so on. It was messy. But basically, Rami Makhlouf was the symbol early on, the first few days of the uprising in the town of Dir'a in southern Syria, as people were calling for the end of corruption, and Rami Makhlouf was the symbol they were going for, until, of course, things got really violent in terms of the putting down these protests, and then you had the dialectic, the back and forth, and so on. But Rami Makhlouf was at the center of the very early days of protests in Syria. Anyway, this is what I was sharing earlier. Not only is the damage to U.S. bases real, but the actual long-standing impact on host countries is yet to be fully revealed. That's my comment on majority of U.S. military sites in Middle East damaged by Iran. So this is an investigation by CNN that goes through every single base and addresses the extent of the damage. And this is, again, something that we will hear more about as time goes by, regardless of what you hear officially, right? And that's for obvious reasons.
It was a very interesting report. Yeah.
Yes. This is the United States condemns the pro-Hamas global Sumud flotilla.
I'm surprised they didn't call it pro-ISIS.
Depth of the depraved is my commentary. Unbelievable. Yeah, no, instead of condemning the Israeli attack and the abduction of international activists, the United States condemned the global Sumud flotilla, claiming it's linked to Hamas. Of course, everything that you don't like is linked to Hamas. I'm going to start using this in my own relationships and describing it as a political effort undermining its policy plans. I mean, we're going to get to the Hasbara. I'm going to go quickly, Mouin, because we have a lot of Hasbara stuff. But, we're going to get to that. But no wonder, now that people are, in majorities, are seeing what's going on, every single iteration that tries to incriminate the other, which is usually the Palestinian side or supporters of Palestinian rights or Palestine's anything, no wonder it is actually further digging the grave of Israel's reputation in the United States, let alone other parts of the world. We're latecomers to human decency.
Yeah.
All right, and this is our wonderful Mark. The greatest threat to free speech in the West continues to be Israel First loyalists who, as a desperate response to skyrocketing contempt for Israel, are imposing all forms of censorship on Israel critics. Mark Levin now just says it openly, and this is, of course, from Glenn Greenwald.
Is problematic because first time things like this have happened, but it really is problematic because so much of it is protected. And you heard people say, don't you believe in the First Amendment? They don't even know what the First Amendment believes. Do you want to deplatform people? You know, the libs do that. I don't have any problem with deplatforming Nazis or jihadis. I don't have any problem with deplatforming them. What does that mean, deplatforming them? A government law? No. It means that X or Twitter or Facebook or Amazon with Twitch and so forth says, you know what? You're a lowlife. We're not paying, get off our platform. What's wrong with that? It's called private enterprise. I got no problem with that.
What's wrong with that? طيب. طبعا, this is not worth commenting on. It's self-explanatory. I'm just, we're showing this because this is the preoccupation of tomorrow.
Yeah.
A complete 180 reversal of all sorts of things that supposedly these very people prided themselves on and prided the United States on, and so on. Lemoyne College president tells genocide survivor he cannot use the word genocide. This is a story about the statement. Musab Abu Toha. A statement from Musab Abu Toha is in response to Lemoyne College presidential emails to students today. Do you want to say anything about this?
No, it's just I've started calling Zionism a totalitarian movement. It brooks absolutely no opposition, and if you cross the line of criticizing Israel, they'll come after you, your education, your family, your employer, your career. They won't even accept a children's drawing in a hospital. We had a famous case in London where they sent a whole team of lawyers after the hospital to take down these children's drawings because there was a Palestinian flag on one of them or something like that. It's they will accept no mention of Palestine or Palestinians because formally these don't exist. I mean, it's pure totalitarianism. You're muted.
This is part of the post. President Linda Lemura, without naming him, wrote that the words caused real hurt to Jewish students and implied its use was incompatible with the college's commitment to inclusion. I mean,
well, I'm sure there are German students who had parents or grandparents in the SS who would be hurt by references to the Holocaust. So what?
I mean, it's truly unfathomable. And then this question of hurt, right? There's actually a meme about it that's going to come up in a few minutes. Let's move on. So this is basically Donald Trump sharing that Iran has just informed us that they are in a state of collapse. They want us to open the Hormuz Strait as soon as possible as they try to figure out their leadership situation, which I believe they will be able to. Thank you. And then he says, thank you for your attention to this matter. My comment is, it's beyond lies now. It's unbelievable. It's beyond lies now. It's almost MDRA, make delusion real again. Also, imagine the Iranians' message. Like, if the Iranians are actually telling Trump that they are actually in a state of collapse. They informed me, he says, or informed us they are in a state of collapse. So that would be the quote from the Iranians. Hey, President Trump, we're falling apart here.
Please help us.
We're falling apart here. Just wanted you to take note, given it takes a ton of evidence to convince you we're not doing so well. So, we're just going to categorically confess. And also, our leadership situation is a mess, contrary to your propaganda.
The problem is, the U.S. is basically a personality cult. It's a Trump personality cult. And anyone with a brain can see this guy has absolutely no idea what he's doing. He doesn't have a strategy. He doesn't have a policy. He's just making contradictory statements 24/7. And then you see you read in the papers or you see on TV all these serious people explaining to you what Trump is seeking to achieve, what his strategy is, what his policy is. It's so laughable. I mean, how can you analyze someone who doesn't know what he's doing
But
and
this one,
pretend that you know what he's doing?
but this one is beyond like
Yeah,
this one is an outlier even within Trump's lexicon to say that Iran just informed us, which means there's a specificity to the situation. Just informed us that they are in a state of collapse. ما بعرف. I mean,
you know, if Stalin would have made a statement like this, Pravda would have refused to publish it.
unbelievable. I say unbelievable a lot for a reason, I guess. طيب, 8 in 10 Democrats currently have an unfavorable view of Israel, up from 69% last year and 53% 2022. With these kinds of solid high numbers, the Democratic Party has to change. This is from Pew Research, blah, blah, blah. It's just an ongoing decline. Jewish kids, according to J Street, deserve to feel seen, safe, and proud of who they are. The response should be celebration, not anti-Semitism. And this is in reference to the appearance on Sesame Street, which actually celebrates Jewish American Heritage Month, which is all, that's fucking awesome. Whatever. I mean, celebrate everybody. The problem is, according to my post, I'm quoting myself, I've become like Thomas Friedman. Absolutely. Wish the celebration was also the response when Rami Youssef went to Sesame Street. And it
that caused a meltdown, no? Yeah, it was a meltdown.
Jerks calling things. I mean, I don't know. And I don't understand how these people actually can say this, and then they have followers that are actually respectable, and you see them at the supermarket, at the university, on the street, and they are followers of people who actually condemned the appearance of an Egyptian man at Sesame Street, and the guy looks like one of the puppets because he's so sweet and lovable. I mean, just want to have him sit. I can't say this joke anymore. You want to hug him.
It reminds me of the story Edward Said used to tell about how he was approached by a publisher who specialized in translation of foreign literature, and asked Said for recommendations. And Edward Said recommended to this publisher to translate novels by Naguib Mahfouz into English. This is before Mahfouz won the Nobel Literature Prize and became a well-known figure. And the publisher then got back to him and said, the problem is Arabic is a controversial language. So there you have it.
Very quickly, Lebanon. This can't be real, can it? Because I was told Israel is only in Lebanon because of Hezbollah, and this dude is from 8 years before Hezbollah existed. Do you want to tell us who Moshe Dayan is, or should we listen to it first? Let's listen to it first.
Do we have to?
To say it in a very clear way that if we cannot live at peace on our side, then eventually the entire southern part of Lebanon won't be able to live there. Eventually, a good part of Lebanon will be destroyed and deserted. Wanted to...
You're muted again.
Eventually, a good part of Lebanon will be destroyed, and most people will not be able to live in the south. This is
broken record.
Moshe Dayan.
This is Moshe Dayan, who was Israel's leading military hero. He was, I believe, chief of staff of its army, and then defense minister. So he's seen as responsible for Israel's military accomplishments in the Suez War of 1956, and then in the 1967 June War, and then, of course, disgraced himself in the 1973 October War. Was a complete maximalist, but he's someone who was absolutely central to Israel's history during its first several decades. So this is not some fringe figure. This is someone in a position of real authority, making a statement of actual policy.
Decades ago, right?
Yes.
which is something. I mean, so many. There should be a list of things that
That
Israeli
they've always been
leaders
saying.
have been
Yeah.
saying, include from the question of nuclear weapons in Iran to the question of Palestinians don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Yeah.
I mean, there should be like a small dictionary just so we know how to navigate. All right, this post will one day be used as evidence in a court of law. This is in response to Benjamin Netanyahu's post, Lebanon Continuing,
Yeah.
which is translated from
Amazing.
Hebrew.
Openly bragging.
Yep. This is Asad Abu Khalil, a newspaper page from As-Safir 1974. There was no Hamas, no Hezbollah or Islamic Republic of Iran. Among the headlines, there is this. In 7 years, Israel killed 168 Lebanese, injured and kidnapped 412 and destroyed hundreds of homes. This is from Al-Safir, which is one of the major newspapers in Lebanon, closed a few years ago, was basically one of the leftist newspapers addressing the same things again that we are witnessing today. This is another post by Glenn Greenwald. It continues to be a bizarre aspect of U.S. politics that so many American Christians defend Israel, even when it attacks Christian villages and churches and kills Americans and or Christians, as Israel often does, and even seem grateful to pay for it. The Mike Huckabee complex.
Well
This
put.
is
Yeah.
this is the. Let me just. I have to say something here. Give me a second. Why is? This is basically what's left of the village. I just want to say that, like in Iraq, when churches were attacked or when Christians were attacked, and a lot of people would make a big deal out of it because they're Christians. There are two things. First of all, people make a big deal out of it because they assume that perhaps empathy would work to affect people's opinions of Israel's, or in the other case, the United States. Brutal invasions, bombing, barbarism, and what have you. But the reality is that these still constitute a minority of all kinds of bombings and killing and devastation that we have observed. So they are inflated in the media because of this connection to presumably how people might react if they see that Christians are also being targeted, and also because Israel uses this as part of its propaganda to say that they protect Christians as opposed to others.
Yeah.
And we will see a couple of things where we are.
The only Christian state in the Middle East, Israel.
It's coming, Jay, in a minute. When Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel on March 2nd, 2 days after Israel and the United States launched a war in Iran, the resulting Israeli operation to destroy the group quickly became a mission to flatten swaths of Lebanon. These are the satellite images revealing the scale of Israeli destruction in Lebanon. It's really unbelievable, by the way. If you look
Nothing
at
left. Not a single stone left standing.
Yeah. Imagine
razed to the ground. Like what was it? Carthage in the Roman in the Punic Wars.
Imagine this is in Israel proper 48. Imagine this is somewhere in the United States or in Europe. This picture alone will basically cause a revolution. And it's just one example or one indication, one specimen, one model, if you will, and instance of hundreds in Lebanon and far more in Gaza.
Yeah.
And I can't get enough of this. This is Israel's invasion in Lebanon pictured here.
It's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Gaza, we don't have much time, so we'll go through this a bit quickly. A new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation whistleblower, David McIntosh, a contractor with Safe Reach Solutions, says he saw Israeli soldiers regularly use lethal force against unarmed aid seekers, including a 12-year-old boy who they shot and killed, and likely killed. The report from Rana Natur, why does she have an H in her name? The report from Rana Natur adds to claims from groups like Doctors Without Borders and whistleblower Anthony Aguilar that GHF sites were militarized and extremely deadly for Gaza's citizens. This is a very important and revealing report, by the way. We will have these links available if you'd like to look at them. The interesting thing is that during the moment that we observe these things happening in real time as a result of actually 4K footage reaching us, it just seems unbelievable to actually to the other side, or that it was manufactured, or it was basically Hamas trying to prevent people from reaching aid and
Yeah.
so on. Now, when it actually becomes almost, I mean, not completely, but almost a given that this actually happened, there's no outrage.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Gaza, human development. This is a United Nations report. Human development set back 77 years as recovery costs rise to $71 billion. It's not the money, it's not the cost in dollar amount, but it's the decades that development is set back. I'm a genocide scholar and I approve this message. This is basically a response to people saying that what happened in Gaza is genocide, and all genocide scholars approve, or most genocide scholars approve that this is a genocide. Some people, there is a flurry of quote unquote people who say, I'm a genocide scholar and I approve the message that I'm a genocide scholar and Israel is not committing one. Basically, this is something that has been circulating. And my quick comment is, I think the word
is most definitely not a genocide scholar any more than the guy he's.
I mean, yeah, but irrespective. But I think the word, which is the tweet here, the word these folks are looking for is supporter, not genocide scholar. I'm a genocide supporter. I think there's a typo in most of these tweets. Israel has created more child amputees than any other entity in the entire 300,000-year history of human life on planet Earth. The number of child amputees is so staggering and off the charts, compared not just to this or that war, but so many of the wars combined, and it still exceeds those numbers. I don't know how. I mean, I'm not going to get into this. The idea that how long will it take us to really absorb the magnitude of the devastation and the slaughter. I'm not sure if
it's unfathomable.
Finally, this is a piece of good news. Omar Hamad, who actually is somebody that I've spoken with a couple of times, and we're still in touch, and we will be having him. I keep saying, but he's in Gaza, so I'm not going to put any pressure on him. Basically started the first library in Gaza. And these are the pictures of the library. Of course, one of the books were criticized by an observer from, I think, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, because of the content, as if libraries don't have all kinds of books, whether we like the content or not.
I think a proper library will only have FDD publications.
Yeah. So this is really remarkable, and I'm not sure how they were able to preserve these books. So this is the opening of the library, and it's really something. First library to be built during the genocide in Gaza. All right, we're moving to the final section. Okay, so we're gonna do a rapid fire here. Clash report. This is the Hasbara section. Is it Hasbara or Hasbara?
It's Hasbara.
Hasbara.
Yeah.
But is it bilha or bilha?
It's with a ha.
Ha. Okay. Hasbara. Israel is ramping up propaganda, spending to $730 million in 2026, a five-fold jump from 2025 to counter global backlash. Big push into social media ads and AI tools, influencer campaigns, and foreign delegations. We've heard about many of these, including podcasters getting a sum of money for particular programs, and centralized media room inside the foreign ministry. I don't know. I think that is verified, actually. Israel just
They still haven't paid Elon Levy.
Yeah. So this is I mean, what we are witnessing is this attempt to deal with the for a supporter of the genocidal state to deal with the unending support of a Palestinian cause or critique of Israel's ways. Because let's face it, right? The critique of Israel is not coming always from the right place, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that we support everyone that critiques Israel. We support the critique because of what Israel is doing, but not necessarily every single person or movement and so on. But that's immaterial. What's important is that there is a disbelief, and I've seen it. I mean, almost firsthand. I can't address some of these anecdotes, but you are already seeing, starting actually last week, you're already seeing, if you go to your feed on X, I'm not sure about Instagram because I'm not under 25, but on X you are seeing a slew of additional posts. Like, arithmetically, it's a lot more posts that actually are telling Israel's narrative, including the question of genocide and so on. So we are already seeing that. I'm not sure how far this will go. Next, Muhammad Al-Kurd here addresses the story by Dropsat News about the top
It was an
content
important
producers
story.
linked to the Canary mission. The main writers and doxers behind Canary mission has been identified as Elihu David Stone, Yehuda HaKohen, Abigail Bornstein, Haron Dickel, and Alexander Malbin Duncan, all American Israelis, dual citizenship. And I must say, I'm sure you are on Canary Mission. I am on there several times, including a couple of years back. This is something that's big news, right? And it's I'm not going to dwell on this, but would you like to say anything?
No, just Canary Mission. Basically, it's an integral part of this totalitarian apparatus of Israel. Anyone who criticizes Israel, and this, by the way, Canary Mission specializes in persecuting undergraduates. We're talking about people who aren't even 20 years old, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, putting their personal information, addresses, basically, trying to drive youngsters out of society because they've criticized Israel. It's absolutely disgusting totalitarian stuff.
Here's an unbelievable, yet another unbelievable story. Ben Shapiro says the U.S. has been an unreliable ally to Israel. We literally give them billions of dollars every year. This person, James Lee, I don't know who this person. I do know who this person is. He was on some news channel and then had to leave. One of those on the center left. Anyway, so this is Ben Shapiro for your listening pleasure.
Would you describe the U.S. as a good ally right now?
I think that the U.S. has always been a bit of an unreliable ally, shall we say?
Would you describe the U.S. as a good ally right now?
I think that the U.S. has always been a bit of an unreliable ally, shall we say?
Would you describe the U.S. as a good ally right now?
The interesting thing is that he's saying it's an unreliable ally. He's not saying to the United States. He's speaking as like an Israeli.
Yeah, well, you can never do enough for Ben Shapiro. You're muted again.
He's having some trouble now. If you want to send some donations to his Daily Wire. Israeli newspaper Maariv in 1984. Khomeini's atomic bomb is entering the final stages of production with German assistance. مش معقول.
Someone else on social media.
Isn't Maariv the more quote unquote liberal?
I'm trying to remember. It's Ma'ariv is the one associated with the Israeli Labor Union, or if it's privately owned.
That's what
remember.
I thought. Tayyib. All good. This is what I wrote. What has become of Hasbara? this is just, it's ubiquitous. It's not just this post. So this person writes, the more they lie about Israel, the more I pick up my Bible. The more I pick up my Bible, the more I feel the need to defend the truth, and the more I realize what time it is. I don't
I
know
don't
what
even
that.
understand that.
ولا أنا ما فهمت شيء. The point, I didn't get anything. I'm translating just in case people accuse me of saying something that's, we live in America, the land of the free. So the reason I'm highlighting this is because you're finding literally hundreds of posts that are like that. I mean, I know that there are bots, but then if you go to the actual account, it's a lot of them are not bots. It's just people that are somehow, making these arguments because they are in a situation where, for the first time in their lives, some of these people actually joined in 2009, 2011. So they're clearly not recent accounts. And it's this is what it has come to. This is where Hasbara is right now in so many ways. I mean, this is probably like low hanging fruit. Daniel Seidman, in 1948, the Christian population of Jerusalem numbered 31,000, approximately 19% of the population. Today, the Christian population of Jerusalem hovers around 10,000, approximately 1% of the population. This is in response to the foreign minister of Israel saying Israel is the only country in the region with a growing Christian population. Can you believe they are actually saying that despite all the statistics? Lie
Incredible.
after lie. I mean, what does that do? I almost want to shield our students from this, not because I want to protect Israel, but basically there is this unbelievable syndrome, right? And it happens. And it happens, by the way, when they are speaking out. Israelis are speaking out to the world, perhaps more than internally. Mark Levin saying it's bullshit that Megyn Kelly is what she's criticizing. She's saying on Piers Morgan, and I can't believe we're like even quoting or talking about Megyn Kelly for obvious reasons, having to do with a lot of her seriously problematic, offensive, racist things that she said. It's morphed, she says, it's morphed into that Israel has a biblical right to your support for whatever part of the Middle East they want to occupy. It's really something that is worth listening to, actually, because it represents
when you've lost Megyn Kelly,
a large portion of the American public.
People who are very pro-Israel, like Levin, like the folks over at Commentary Magazine, who for a very long time now have been trying to conflate anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And then a debate unfolded about what is anti-Zionism? Because many of us thought it was, do you believe that Israel, is a country, like they deserve to have a place to live? It's kind of morphed into more like they have a biblical right to your support for whatever portion of the Middle East they want to occupy. And if you define it that way, which I think Tucker does, more and more people are like, well, I'm out. I'm not saying that. They don't have a right to dominate the Middle East, and they don't have a right to be in those particular borders any more than the United States has a right to be in its particular borders. Over the course of hundreds of years, these things change. There's not a biblical right that I need to support as a Christian. But it has been the most ardently pro-Israel people, like the Commentary Magazine people, like Mark Levin, who have been trying to intentionally make that conflation. And it's just not true. You go on your show regularly and criticize your government and the...
Anyway, yeah, I mean, it's worth just talking about that phenomena. And it's also important for us to recognize that even though some of these claims are correct, the conflation is actually, in my view, racist, right, between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And it's something that Israel practices, which is anti-Semitism more than anyone else, because they are speaking or pretend or present themselves as speaking on behalf of all Jews, and then they commit genocide and so on, which is the most heinous version of anti-Semitism. In all cases, it's also important to recognize the extent to which a lot of these claims and critics who are in those instances, not all of them, but in many instances, saying the correct thing, are not necessarily your friend. So just important to keep that in
many
mind.
of them were for many years Israel's biggest cheerleaders.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, but in general, like, once once they're done with Israel, they're gonna turn to you and me.
Yeah,
I mean, they've been
exactly.
turning to you and me prior, but
Well, they never really stopped. Yeah.
Yes, they've been doing it. This is the one I wanted to share about the feelings. Today's Hasbara in a nutshell. This is, I mean, I may be committing genocide. That's Israel speaking, but you were mean, and that's worse.
Much worse. Yeah.
Akid.
All right.
That's you. That's you, Mouin. And after this, I'll let you go. I'll finish on my own.
All right. Repeat after me. An Arab family born in Palestine and whose ancestors have lived in Palestine for as long as can be remembered are foreigners, but a Jewish family born in Europe and whose ancestors have lived in Europe for as long as can be remembered is from the Middle East. This whole idea that Palestinians are foreigners in their own homeland, but those who immigrated within the last century are somehow indigenous to it for the last 3,000 years. So, and you can see in the comments immediately, where are Arabs from? So this whole, what is it? Arabs are from Arabia, Jews are from Judea. Yeah. So, someone living in Los Angeles or Seattle is really from Hebron.
Tayyip,
You're muted again.
I know you got to run. There's a whole bunch, quite a few other things. I'll go through them very quickly, but I know you have to go. We actually ran over. We always run over. I don't think anybody's watching anymore, but it doesn't matter because this can be watched later. Actually, there are people watching. Okay, Mouin, thank you so much.
Good talking to you. Bye.
Habibi. All right. Now that we're done with this guy, next. So this person actually erased their post. They were denying that Ben Gurion has said things about evacuating and expelling the Arabs as just irrational consequence of what the movement was doing in Palestine. And I wrote, this is the first person, and then I wrote, okay, there's more, who actually denies the work of Israeli Zionist historians who quote the exact opposite from Ben Gurion. I'm telling you, this is the end of days for the racist Zionists. Pardon the redundancy. It has come to this. The actual historical record presented by Israelis themselves and available publicly for all to see is now being denied because it is so embarrassing, not to mention racist and criminal. And I say keep it up because it's something that is actually moving the needle on Israel's crimes and views of it. It's less important. This person is depicting a view of chaotic fighting in Gaza, in Deir al-Balah, regardless of context. And their comment is, "We can fix this by giving these people a country." This is a sarcastic comment, to which I wrote, or okay, or maybe have the Jewish state Israel continue with this genocide. So it's basically a way to camouflage what's happening. Israel supporters are so desperate amid the titanic waves of humanity, including U.S. public, against Israel's crime that they are scooping crumbs against detractors. This is a note about Tucker Carlson and John Kiriakou, who were addressing the issues regarding Tehran and so on. And the commentary on this, it says, Tucker Carlson claims that Iran is one of the most liberal countries in the region and so on and so forth. And they keep going. This person keeps going. And it's really remarkable that this is how they have to make their own point. Because when you look at the actual behavior of the actual state that they are supporting, the actual actions, there's very little to address. So they are turning to, and this is happening everywhere. They basically, by they, I mean Israel supporters who would like to salvage something that Israel is providing that is not what everyone else is seeing. I don't know what they're thinking. It's not working, and it's actually having the reverse effect. Whether or not critics of Israel are correct in every single thing they say, and of course, that's not the case. Muslims do not believe that Jesus is God. Jews will. Yeah, this person is also part of the Hasbara Symphony. Um, and the responses to this person are very interesting, including that no, somebody says, actually, no, that's not the case. Um, somebody's actually Judaism. Well, that's reader's context. Judaism teaches Jesus is not God, actually, the Messiah or divine, as this contradicts strict monotheism and unfulfilled messianic prophecies. So yeah, uh, I mean that's how far things are going, and this is not an outlier, right? If you actually do a semi-systematic search for things on either of these any of these topics, you'll see, especially recently, an uptick in these arguments. Whatever the merits, you see an uptick in these arguments. This is a Israeli minister, uh, Israeli minister Ben Gvir's English translator says Nick Fuentes is right about everything he claims Israel is planning to do, and he says, well, he's right, except that he thinks it's okay, and he's claiming that, or saying that Nick is saying it's not okay. So the quote from this person is, "You're saying all this as if it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's God's plan. It's the historical plan. And Israel has every right to extend its defense to the Arab countries and across this region." In other words, uh, racists on all sides are meeting, right? The racism of this person is meeting uh, the racism of Nick. Yep. We'll skip this. Ben Gurion called me in and said, this is somebody who's quoting, I can't keep a straight face, who's quoting Golda Meir, who said Palestinians don't exist. There's no Palestine. Quoting her saying, Ben Gurion called me in and said, I want you to go to Haifa at once and see to it that the Arabs who remain in Haifa are treated properly. I also want you to try to persuade those Arabs on the beach to come back. My God. Is this real? There is, and my response is, there is a reason Hasbara has turned Israel's reputation into mud, even among liberal Zionists. This post encapsulates Israel's slow demise, if these are the people who are supporting it and defending it. This is a very important double down news whole mini doc on the main cause of anti-Semitism is the fact that the Israeli state claims to represent all Jews and is committing a genocide in Gaza in the name of all Jews. It's actually something that is worthwhile to listen to and see the citations and documentation. This is about 15 minutes. There's no way I can run it right now. And this is by Mark Etkind, son of a Holocaust survivor, who is addressing these matters. We can listen to just a minute.
If Western governments are actively supporting a genocide, which is live streamed every day, after 2 years, it is hardly surprising that some highly disturbed individuals might react to that by doing something as disgusting and outrageous as the attack in Manchester. The main cause of anti-Semitism at the moment in the world today is the fact that the Israeli state claims to represent all Jews and is committing a genocide in Gaza in the name of all Jews. Israel has the Star of David on its tanks, on its planes, while it is killing women and children in Gaza. It's stirring up anti-Semitism all the time. That as the son of a Holocaust survivor, I do know something about anti-Semitism, and I take it very, very seriously. I think it's so important that Jewish people speak out against what Israel is doing. Jews can be identified with a genocide, and this is something extremely disturbing and upsetting to me, and I don't think I'm the only person with a Jewish background who feels like that. To be part of a community which is identified as being perpetrators of a genocide is just the worst thing that could happen. And Jewish people across the world have to do all they can to oppose what Israel is doing, mostly to stop the killing in Gaza and elsewhere, but also to save Jews from the guilt and the shame and the horror of what this will mean if Israel continues to get away with it. It is understandable that many people within the Jewish community do believe that the anti-Semitic attack in Manchester was in part caused by the pro-Palestine protests. The reason they believe that is because the unelected leadership of the Jewish community and their newspapers, the Jewish Chronicle, for instance, claim that all the time. It's not because it's true. Unfortunately, a lot of people within the Jewish community have to realize they're being systematically lied to by people in power, by politicians, and by journalists. Traditionally, Jewish people knew they were being systematically lied to because for centuries the establishment was anti-Semitic and came out with all sorts of nonsense, and Jewish people, being alienated from the rest of society, were able to see things more objectively. This is why some of the greatest thinkers in history have been Jewish, such as Karl Marx, Freud, Einstein and others, and we need to bring back that critical understanding back into Jewish communities as we had in the past.
We need to recognize that the unjust demonization of Israel spills over and contributes to an anti-Jewish tone in this country and also encourages extremism.
If the chief rabbi and other official leaders of the Jewish community wanted to significantly reduce anti-Semitism, they should make it very clear that Jewish people in Britain, on the whole, simply do not support the atrocities and massacres in Gaza. That wouldn't end anti-Semitism, I concede that, but it would significantly reduce it. The fact that the leaders of the official Jewish community don't even dream about saying such things, I think is very, very worrying.
All right. That's self-explanatory. Next, well, this is Mouin. I'm not gonna. This is about Gad Saad, which has it. Mouin and Gad go back and forth, and I think Mouin stopped quoting him directly. He's taking a screenshot, I think, here and there, not in every instance. So I'll let this one go. Next, according to Hezbollah, that's also Mouin. According to Hezbollah logic, anyone opposed to the U.S. war on Iran is motivated by hatred of white people. Yeah, you have to see some of these things that that one sees, and you have to recognize that they are actually believed and supported widely, not by the majority of people, but by significant minorities that are sometimes close to the halls of power. This is another one by Mouin. Why did Mouin leave? I will not speak for him. Imagine if everyone who purchased property treated the transaction as a license to declare sovereignty. This is in response to my great-grandparents bought empty land from a Syrian merchant 100 years ago and built a kibbutz themselves. I don't owe you a fucking thing, Pali. Yeah. Ahlan wa sahlan. All right. So we are going to simply finish with a couple of, that's it, two more on Germany. German foreign minister says Israel has every right to be in South Lebanon. Wallah, I didn't know. German foreign minister says Israel has every right to be in South Lebanon, but warns of damages of war. Thank you, Habibi, for warning for damages of war. This is a comment by Glenn Deason. Germany's foreign minister says Israel has every right to be in South Lebanon. Germany will still not shy away from lecturing other countries about international law and human rights. All right. Second is also by Glenn, recognizing the reality that the war against Iran was a failure, that the proxy war against Russia has been lost, and that the economic war against China has backfired, is smeared and censored in decadent Europe as being pro-Iran, pro-Russia, and pro-China. So I'll leave it at that. This is just our way of addressing Europe. And then finally, there's this person, Colin Brazier. Islamic voters believe Gaza is a bigger issue than the economy. And my comment is, well, this headline is a bad start for the supposed noble inquiry into what voters that are Muslim, who are Muslim, believe. A genocide is indeed a far bigger issue than the economy, especially when that fucking economy supported it. And with this, gentle and polite language, I would like to end this broadcast. We've been here since